This is the Biology Unit 5 revision video looking at fertility and the menstrual cycle. So at birth we can tell what sex a child is based on the external genitals. We call these the primary sexual characteristics. Now at puberty the children's bodies begin to change and they become sexually mature and they become adults. At this stage of change from a child to an adult is called adolescence, and this can last several years. Now, one of the things that happens is that the ovaries and testes in males and females will develop and begin to produce sex hormones, and it is these sex hormones in females, the estrogen and progesterone, that are made in the ovaries, and these are involved in controlling the menstrual cycle. Now, first of all, we're going to look at the reproductive system of male and female. We'll look at the secondary sexual characteristics, aside from the primary, which are just the fact that we can see the external genitals, and we'll look at the menstrual cycle and how it's controlled. So here we have a diagram of the male reproductive system, and we're going to look at each part and the function of it as we go along. So the first one here is the testes. I apologise for that. So here are the testes. This is where sperm are made. Okay, so we've got 2 in male, sperm are made in there. Number 2, here we have the scrotum. Now this is the scientific word for the skin that contains the testes, and this skin will keep the testes outside of the body. Now that allows the testes to be kept a few degrees cooler than the internal body, and this is better for the development of sperm. We've got the sperm duct, which carries the sperm from the testes to the urethra. This takes us nicely to the urethra. This is the tube that will let the sperm and the urine out of the body. We have the penis here, and this is used to place sperm into the vagina. Now these are the parts of the male reproductive system that you've probably come across before. 2 that you may not be very familiar with are the seminal vesicle and the prostate gland. Now these supply nutrients for the sperm in order to keep them healthy. So here is a diagram of the female reproductive system. We'll start at the ovary. So these 2 structures here are the ovaries where the eggs mature and are released from. They enter the fallopian tube. We've got 2 of those. Here is where the egg is fertilised, and then the egg will travel along the fallopian tube into the uterus. Now the uterus, or the womb, is where the fetus develops. So the fertilised egg will attach to the lining of the womb and will develop over the 9 months. Here, this is a thin membrane called the cervix, which is the entrance to the uterus, and here is the vagina, where the penis is inserted and sperm is received from the penis during sexual intercourse. Then it can make its way up into the fallopian tubes to fertilise the egg. Now if this happens and the egg is fertilised, we call this conception. So at puberty, the sex hormones can cause you to have secondary sexual characteristics. For males, these include the voice deepening or breaking, hair growth on the face and body, the body becoming muscular, genitals develop further, and the testes begin to make sperm. And in females, these sex hormones cause breasts to develop, pubic hair to grow under the arms, the hips widen in preparation for pregnancy and birth, and periods start and the eggs will mature. So as we've just mentioned, at puberty, females start to have a menstrual period once each month. This becomes a monthly cycle, and it is called the menstrual cycle. Now there are 4 hormones involved in this cycle, and these are estrogen, progesterone, FSH, which stands for follicle stimulating hormone, and LH, which stands for luteinizing hormone. So these 4 different hormones control the monthly menstrual cycle, and this flowchart shows the way that happens. So first of all, the pituitary gland, which is found in the brain, releases a hormone called FSH, which is follicle stimulating hormone. Now the ovaries are the organs where the eggs are released from. But in order for them to be released, they need to firstly mature, and FSH causes an egg in one of the ovaries to mature. Now these eggs are found in the ovaries in what we call follicles, and this is where follicle stimulating hormone gets its name from. Now these follicles are like small pockets in the ovary that will allow the egg to mature inside and eventually release the egg. Now FSH also stimulates the ovaries to produce estrogen, because as it's stimulating it to mature the eggs in the ovaries, that will allow estrogen to be produced. Now estrogen stimulates the pituitary gland to release another hormone called LH, or luteinizing hormone. And this LH hormone triggers ovulation from the ovary. It triggers the release of these matured eggs. Now because we won't want any more follicles to be stimulated to mature any eggs, because we only need one a month to be released, the estrogen will inhibit the production of FSH, so it prevents any more follicles from maturing any eggs. Now estrogen also begins to repair the uterus lining from the previous menstrual cycle. After ovulation has happened due to the release of LH, the follicle that has burst open to let out the egg in ovulation doesn't disappear. It turns into what we call a yellow body. And this yellow body that's left over after ovulation starts to release progesterone. Now progesterone has two functions. It will begin to maintain the uterus lining along with estrogen, and it will also inhibit LH production, because again we do not want any more ovulation to happen, because we only need one egg to be released. So FSH triggers the release of estrogen, and estrogen inhibits the release of FSH. This is an example of negative feedback. The same applies to LH triggering ovulation, which releases progesterone, the yellow body, which again inhibits LH. This is another example of negative feedback. And this is another way to show what happens in the menstrual cycle. So we can see here where the egg is maturing, we have a slight increase in the level of FSH, and that stimulates this to happen, the egg to become mature. Now at this point we've got a large spike in the amount of LH, which triggers ovulation, and we know that. Here where we've got the yellow body formed, we can see that the amount of progesterone is increasing, and the yellow body does secrete the progesterone hormone. Here where we can see the increase in estrogen and progesterone, we can see that relates to the development of the uterus lining, which is the innermost layers of the uterus wall. We can also see that the FSH increase here triggers estrogen to be produced, and when that is at its highest, that triggers FSH levels to go down. Also, when LH levels spike, we get progesterone produced, and then when progesterone increases, then that will decrease the level of LH, linking to the fact that estrogen will inhibit the release of FSH, and progesterone the amount of the release of LH. And this picture here just shows in a different way the follicles developing, maturing the eggs, the process of ovulation and the egg leaving the follicle, and this leftover follicle after bursting producing the yellow body that will release progesterone. Now this information that we know about hormones and how they regulate the menstrual cycle, this can be used not only to prevent pregnancies but also to enhance fertility. So as we've just seen, during pregnancy, if you become pregnant, estrogen and progesterone levels are high, and that means that they will inhibit FSH and LH, because if you're pregnant, we don't want any more eggs maturing and being released. So by taking estrogen and progesterone, which are high levels in pregnancy, as a pill daily, then that would keep estrogen and progesterone levels high in the body. That would mimic pregnancy and prevent ovulation. Without ovulation, you cannot become pregnant. And this preventing of pregnancy is what we call contraception. So as well as being used to prevent pregnancies and reduce fertility, some couples that are not able to have children, who are infertile, may want to use them to increase fertility. Now, some reasons for decreased fertility could include blocked fallopian tubes or sperm ducts, so that we've lost the ability to get sperm to the egg and egg into the uterus, or sperm out from the testes. Eggs are not developing or not released, so they're not developing properly, not maturing or being released effectively from the ovaries. Or the testes that do not produce enough sperm, so there's not enough sperm to be able to survive the journey to fertilise the egg. Now, one of the procedures that can be used to improve fertility is called IVF, or in vitro fertilisation. So in vitro means in glass, so is usually referred to as, sometimes referred to as test tube babies. So the way that this is carried out is that the woman is injected with FSH. This stimulates the ovaries to produce eggs, which are then collected and they are mixed with the man's sperm in glass in vitro. Now, to maximise the success of this procedure, the sperm from the male are analysed and they select the healthy ones and inject them directly into each egg. The fertilised eggs will begin to develop into embryos, and when those embryos, those tiny balls of cells, are produced, then usually about 2 are chosen and they are inserted into the woman's uterus. Now, hopefully from here, that will result in implantation into the womb. However, this doesn't always happen and this can be unsuccessful. However, it can also be extremely successful and you can end up with multiple births. There are other ways to treat infertility, and we've got 4 ways here that you need to know about. The first one being artificial insemination. Now, if the male's sperm count is low, then you can get donated sperm from other males inserted into the woman's vagina. So the woman may become pregnant, which would be the woman's child, but not the male's. This would be the sperm donor's child. This process can also be used for single women, so you don't have to be in a couple, and for lesbian couples who want to start a family. Now, the second treatment is egg donation. Now, in this process, FSH is given to the woman, and that will stimulate the eggs to be produced. The woman then can donate those eggs to women who cannot make eggs, and women who undergo IVF will often donate any spare eggs that they have produced. So this can be used for women who cannot make eggs, mature them, or cannot release them, so that they can be mixed with the male sperm and inserted into the female. The third treatment is surrogacy. Now, this can happen for various different reasons, including the removal of the uterus, and another woman, which we call the surrogate, will have the first woman and their partner's embryo, which has been carried out by IVF, implanted into the uterus, and they will carry the fetus throughout the birth, give birth, and then the surrogate mother will give the baby to the biological mother. And finally, we've got ovary transplants. Now, this isn't very common, only a few have ever been done, and the donor has been the identical twin of the recipient, so we've got to have tissue matches to be able to do this, just like any other transplant. So this could be used to give women, restore their fertility, especially if they're undergoing early menopause and are no longer fertile, or for people who have had radiation treatment for cancer which has affected their fertility. It is possible, though, whilst being treated for cancer, to have the ovaries removed, frozen, and have them transplanted back after the treatment if that is chosen. Now, although these are all treatments to help people with fertility, as people often want a family and being childless can actually cause distress and sadness, it's not always guaranteed that these treatments will work. All medical procedures carry some risk, and for some of these procedures there are some moral and ethical issues with them. Becoming pregnant, although a happy time for most people, can also be quite scary due to the fact that there is a lot of unknown during pregnancy. Now, one of the big worries that parents have is that their children will be healthy, and once upon a time abnormalities would not be seen until birth, conditions such as Down syndrome, for example. Now, during pregnancy, there are different screening methods that are available to check the development of the fetus and monitor these conditions. So one of the screening methods is ultrasound, and ultrasound uses sound waves that are projected into the uterus, and they're reflected back, and that produces a picture on screen. Now, they used to check fetal development, but some abnormalities cannot be seen. So one of the disorders that are screened for is Down syndrome, and this is caused by an extra chromosome. Now, the way that they screen for that is that a large needle is inserted into the uterus. They take a sample of amniotic fluid that will contain some cells from the fetus. This is called amniocentesis. Now, what they do then with these fetal cells is that they grow them in a lab and allow them to divide. At this point, during division, the chromosomes can be observed under a microscope and counted. So if there's an extra chromosome, that can be identified. So at this point, if it is identified that the fetus has an extra chromosome, the couple can then decide whether they want to terminate the pregnancy or not. Now, this is quite controversial because some people believe that screening out disabilities means that the disabled are less valued in society. There's a 1% chance that amniocentesis can cause miscarriage, so there is some issues with deciding to have that screening method carried out in the first place. So you could miscarry a baby that has Down syndrome, or you could miscarry a healthy fetus. And that brings us to the end of this revision video about fertility and the menstrual cycle.